What do we want?
Real democracy!
When do we want it?
Now! What do we want?
Real democracy!
When do we want it?
Now!
Welcome to Real Democracy Now. I'm Nivek Thompson, and Real Democracy Now is a podcast for people who think we can and should improve how democracy works. This podcast looks at democracy from different angles to help you think about how democracy might be improved. Hello, I'm Nivek Thompson, and this is episode 17 of Season 1 of Real Democracy Now, a podcast. Season 1 is all about deliberative mini-publics. So far, we've heard from academics, practitioners, and a politician about what deliberative mini-publics are and how they work. In today's episode, I talked to 4 everyday citizens who have been involved in deliberative mini-publics in Canada, Australia, and the UK. From Canada, I'm talking to Ben McPeek, who is a member of the Residents' Reference Panel for the Davenport Community Rail Overpass project. From Australia, I talked with Lewis Adams, who was on the Infrastructure Victoria Citizens Jury in regional Victoria, and Caroline Victor, who was a member of the Dogs and Cats Citizens Jury in South Australia. And finally, from the UK, I speak to Andy Holdup, who is a member of the Citizens Assembly South. Each of these people provides their own unique take on being a randomly selected participant in a deliberative mini-public. But they all agree they would recommend being part of a deliberative mini-public to family and friends. Ben McPeek was a part of the Residents' Reference Panel for the Davenport Community Rail Overpass project in 2015. This reference panel was commissioned by Metrolinx and designed and facilitated by MASS LBP. I spoke to Peter MacLeod from MASS LBP about their work in episode 6 of the podcast. Ben was one of the younger members of this panel. So thanks very much for joining me today, Ben. Why did you volunteer to be part of the reference panel for the Davenport Overpass project?
It was mostly because when we received the letter, like an application to be a part of it, one of us in the household had to do it, and both my parents are working, so I was the next eligible member who was not working at the time, and it was just easier time-wise for us.
Okay, and so when you say that one of you had to do it, was it a compulsory thing?
No, it was not compulsory, but we'd like to be, my family that is, like to be active in our community, and we thought the best way to know what's going on is to have one of us on the committee.
So Ben, from your perspective, what worked well and what didn't work so well in the process that you were involved in?
Well, what worked well was that we had a fairly broad range from the community because it was a volunteer thing. It wasn't mandatory. People who were there wanted to be there. So there were very few people who dragged their feet or were disgruntled about being there. What didn't work so well was they had done it so that those who received, not everyone in the community received letters, only a select portion did. As a result, the people who did come came from mostly the same nationality and age group, which resulted in most of the opinions being fairly similar because there was a large concentration of specific age group and ethnicity, and they all had already agreed on what they wanted to do at the meeting.
When you say they'd already agreed on what they wanted to do at the meeting, do you mean in advance of coming together?
No, it's just sort of they all thought the same way, so they approached so they just naturally came with the same sort of point of view.
I see. And so was there a cross-section, like you're obviously a young, you were at the younger end of the age range. Was there a broad range of ages participating?
There was a fairly broad age. There was a significant gap between my own age, which at the time was 19, and the next closest I think was 29. And then from there was a fairly good distribution through early 30s to late 50s. And then there was another gap, and I think we only had one sort of senior citizen-aged individual.
That's interesting, yes. I put these sort of processes together here in Australia, and we normally, one I was doing the other day, I had a huge number of volunteers from the 70-plus age range. So a lot of our retired people are quite keen to get involved in these sort of things. The younger age group is the harder one to get, I find. Can you tell us a bit about the issue that the reference panel you were on was considering? What were you being asked to look at?
Just to give you some background, our neighborhood is called the Junction Triangle because it's bordered by 3 sets of train tracks forming a triangle. We were meeting to discuss plans for the building of a bridge or underpass or some sort of structure to ease the crossing between a east-west line and a north-south line.
Mm-hmm.
The main objective was to look at a bridge or an overpass option, because that was the one that Metrolinx, the municipal body who was responsible for this, wanted to look at. They wanted to get the community's feedback based on that idea.
Mm-hmm.
Although we did end up discussing both an underpass and variations between the two.
Did you have people from outside of the panel give you presentations on their perspectives? I mean, were you able to reach out to some of the groups that weren't part of the panel to find out what they were thinking?
Yeah, we did have. There were some community groups that were invited to come in and give presentations on information concerning their groups. For instance, we had one which was a heritage group from closer to the southern part of the project who gave us some backstory about what that area used to be like and some of their concerns and other information they had to share.
And looking back on the process, do you think it was worthwhile for you and for Metrolinx?
I think Metrolinx definitely gained a lot of insight into what the community was thinking, mostly because the community and Metrolinx didn't see eye to eye with how they wanted to proceed with the project, and they've since had to run a number of other meetings and information sessions to get the community up to speed with what they know. For the community, it was good because we didn't know what was happening there, and that was sort of the first time we had heard definitely one way or the other what was going to happen. For me personally, there was free food at all the meetings, and I am very happy to be fed. So that was nice. Also getting to know some of my community members who live a bit further away than the ones I usually socialize with was nice.
And obviously, you've said that you and your family tend to be community-minded and involved in things. How did this sort of process compare to other things that you've been involved in?
Well, this was sort of my first time being involved, mostly because I'm finally legally, an adult, and my voice matters a bit more. Previously, it was more structured than other things, because typically these things are like a community member will, like for instance, a school will have a meeting, or if there was a building that was going to be built and they wanted the community feedback, they'd host the building at either the library, the local library, or ask the school to use their gym for it. So it was much more structured in so much as Metrolinx had hired another party to host it who does this as their business. So it was very well structured in how the information was communicated and the procedure to get us, the panel members, up to speed and to encourage discussion and critical thinking. Whereas in other things, it's more or less just a free-for-all where whoever is particularly opinionated will state their point and then everyone else argues for or against.
Yeah, that's right. The typical public meeting scenario. So if someone you knew, a friend or a family member, received one of these invitations to be part of another process, what would you say to them? Would you recommend they do it? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
Just generally, I would encourage them to do so, mostly because the food was good and there was a lot of information I learned about my neighborhood I didn't know beforehand. If it wasn't pertaining to the same project, but just the general idea of participating in something like this, I would encourage them to do so, mostly because by participating in it, you are being involved, which means whatever your opinion on the matter is heard to some degree. Whereas if they did not participate in it, then when things were implemented and they complained about it because it wasn't something they liked, it's like you had an opportunity to voice these where it would matter more, because you haven't. I am now just listening to it and there's nothing I can do about it.
Ben, that's all the questions that I wanted to ask you about the process, but I wonder, is there anything that you always tell people about, your experience that I haven't really pulled out that you'd like to share?
Have you ever seen the movie 12 Angry Men?
Yes.
The premise was, I believe it's a jury and they're locked in a room because they have to deliberate. And what's really good about the movie is you can see how people argue for their points of view and how it changes and how eventually they come to a conclusion of some sort. This experience was very much like that. We were locked in a room, and there were 36 of us, I believe. 32, 36. It's been a while now. And we had to come up with a list of things that we think would best represent our community's opinion on this project. And because not everybody agrees on things, we spent a lot of time arguing and trying to convince people that, our point of view, or my point of view, was as valid as their point of view, and we should give everything due consideration, which at times feels like you should be on a movie and that the audience should be laughing because it's very ridiculous.
And did you feel by the end that everybody's perspectives did get a fair hearing before you made your final recommendations?
I feel like we did a very good job of covering everyone's opinions and recommendations, and if anyone felt as though they weren't adequately covered, the mediating team strongly encouraged you to write an independent report that would be included with the group's report. So many people did do so, but as a result, I think that everyone's opinion was heard.
Next up is Lewis Adams, who was a juror on the Infrastructure Victoria Citizens Jury in 2015. Infrastructure Victoria was developing a 30-year infrastructure plan for the state of Victoria in Australia and ran a multi-faceted engagement program which included 2 concurrent citizens juries, one in the capital, Melbourne, and the other in Shepparton in regional Victoria. Lewis was a juror on the regional citizens jury. The Infrastructure Victoria citizens jury process was designed by the newDemocracy Foundation and involved a range of facilitators, including some of the people I spoke to on episode 11 of the podcast, under nation partners who were responsible for delivering the overall engagement process. Thanks so much for joining me today, Lewis. My first question is, why did you volunteer to be part of the Infrastructure Victoria citizens jury?
I'm generally interested in trying things out just as a person. I like having new experiences and just putting my hand up for things in general. And so when I got the email inviting me, as soon as I worked out that it was genuine, because at first I thought, wait, is this real? Is this for real? Because I didn't know a lot about it. But as soon as I found out that it was genuine, it seems like just too good an opportunity to pass up, especially considering what it was that we would be discussing, what it was that we were going to be talking about.
All right, and were you surprised when you got actually selected?
A little, mostly because I'd never heard of deliberative democracy before. Like I hadn't heard of the concept of a citizen jury prior to receiving the email.
So Lewis, for people who haven't been part of a citizens jury, can you describe how the Infrastructure Victoria citizens jury operated? So
we had a meeting place, a regular meeting place, I should say, in Shepparton. Well, there were 2. There was one in regional jury and one metropolitan jury. And the metropolitan jury was basically people from in and around Melbourne. And we were, everyone in the regional jury were from just regional areas. I was probably one of the further people out, being based in Bendigo, but there are a couple of people that had to travel a bit further than myself. newDemocracy, in association with IV, Infrastructure Victoria, they basically explained what was going on, because none of us knew what to expect and what was going to happen going in as well. So it's basically explained what the general schedule was going to be over the 6 sessions, each broken up by about 2 to 3 weeks between sessions. Just explain what the program was, which had a lot of talks from. I should explain what we were discussing, what we were planning before. Basically, planning and putting together a proposal for the next 30 years of Victorian infrastructure development.
That's a big thing.
Oh, it was huge. It was a lot of us discuss in sort of private discussions were noting on how big a job it is, considering we were in effect people off the street. So early on, we had a lot of experts in sort of various fields that we were covering coming in and giving us sort of information, giving us talks about what sort of we needed to know to make the decisions and sort of help sort of fill in a lot of gaps in our knowledge. And we got some say in who we wanted to get in. So if there was a particular expert in a field that we thought would be able to, enlighten us in a certain way, we could ask for newDemocracy to try or Infrastructure Victoria to try and get that person in to talk to us. Mm-hmm. And that was the first 3 to 4 sessions. The 4th session was a bit of a hybrid, sort of split roughly, not equally, but roughly equally with report writing, which is what took up sort of part of the 4th session, and sessions 5 and 6, which was all of us somehow coordinating to put together this multi-page document, which was going to be put to the Victorian Parliament.
Oh, it's amazing. Yes, a big process. So that was 6 meetings, was it? 6 one-day meetings?
6 one-day sessions on Saturdays, and they tended to be about 2 to 3 weeks in between. So we had a bit of time to actually go away and think about what we were trying to do.
From your perspective, what worked well and what didn't work so well in the process that you were involved in the Infrastructure Victoria Citizens Jury?
Well, what worked well, which was very impressive, was the cooperation between the jurors. There were some disagreements, but there wasn't any loud fights or any. We generally cooperated fairly well, and we gave as much as we really could. We gave each other a chance to have their say, and facilitators definitely did a reasonably good job trying to make sure that we could say what we needed to say to the best of their ability at the very least. Mm-hmm. As for what didn't work well, one thing I guess I could keep coming back to, and we definitely did discuss this a fair bit, was the time. We definitely did not have what we felt to be enough time to do the job that we wanted to do. And that was something we knew going in. There's only so much time that can be devoted to this kind of thing. It's not like they can have us in every day for months.
Lewis, do you think if you'd been invited to take part in a process that, say, was 8 days or 10 days instead of the 6 that would have been in the original invitation, do you think you would have put your hand up?
Personally, yes. I can't speak for others. I could definitely say that it would probably, the more days, the harder it would be to get the numbers that they require. So, even though, I would definitely do that. It's not something that's viable for everybody.
Did you ever get to meet the people from the city one, or?
No, actually, that's something that I probably should have said earlier. I would have, in retrospect, would have been nice is to have a little bit of interaction between the city and the regional juries.
So there wasn't any really interaction? I mean, it's a difficult thing, isn't it? Oh,
yeah, definitely. And, I don't know if there's something that could have been worked out as far as that's concerned, but the most we heard about how the city jury was going was what we were hearing from the facilitators.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Looking back at the process, do you think it was worthwhile for you and for Infrastructure Victoria?
Personally, yes. This is not one of those experiences that most people just don't have. Can't have. The random selection kind of sees to that to an extent. And so I feel that I did get a lot out of it. I got a lot of insight into the process that I didn't necessarily have prior to that. As for Infrastructure Victoria, look, I can't speak too much on their behalf, but I feel that they definitely got something out of it as well. And the earnestness when representatives from IV were speaking to us, especially towards the end, the earnestness in their thanks definitely made it feel like that as a group the jury did help them out in their jobs to a great deal.
And have you followed any of what's happened since the juries and the conclusion of the consultation process? Has Infrastructure Victoria kept you informed, or have you looked into what they're doing yourself?
Yes, I have. Not as much as I would have liked to, just for personal time. In fact, because I've been kind of busy in the couple of months since we finished up, so I haven't had a chance to really look into it. But I've definitely taken more of a notice, especially when things like this get reported. Things sort of appropriate to our subject get reported in the media. I'm finding myself taking more of a notice and just, I guess, reading up on certain recommendations that are being made and comparing those to the recommendations that we made or the discussions that we had during the jury process.
And what's your general sense? Is the input from the jury, being reflected in anything that you're reading now?
I feel like it to an extent. It's only really been a few months, so in the long term I'll have a better idea. But so far, it does look like that. But yeah, I can't really say too confidently right now.
Do you have anything else that you sort of think people should know about the process, how it operated, or your experience as a juror or anything like that? I
think the biggest thing is just to give it a go and give it a chance. Like I think the best insight is whenever you sort of see anything about these new forms of democracy, specifically these juries, like just pay attention to them.
Also from Australia is Caroline Victor, who was a juror on the Dogs and Cats Citizens Jury in South Australia in late 2014. This citizens jury was established by the Dog and Cat Management Board to advise on measures to reduce the number of unwanted dogs and cats. This process was facilitated by Democracy Co., whose co-founder, Emily Jenke, I spoke to on episode 10 of the podcast. Recruitment for this citizens jury was undertaken by the New Democracy Foundation. I was working for the New Democracy Foundation at the time and managed the recruitment for this citizens jury. The Dogs and Cats Citizens Jury won the IAP2 Australasian Core Values Award in the environmental category in 2016. Caroline, can you tell me, why did you volunteer to be part of the Dogs and Cats Citizen Jury?
I actually saw it as a huge honour. Quite frankly, I didn't quite know how you got my name. Then I got given this one in a million chance, or 1 in 10,000 chance, and I took it. I thought it was a good thing.
That's great. It's always interesting to find out what sort of motivated people, and definitely a lot of people say that they feel honoured or, excited to have, won the lottery and be selected. So, yeah, that's great.
Exactly right. And it was exactly like that for me.
And from your perspective, what worked well and what didn't work so well in the process that you were involved in?
I was actually really interested as a teacher myself. I think the way that those two ladies did it, I thought it was really M&M did it. They engaged us really well, and they pulled apart and formed, and all the information that we got, it was really well teased out just from a pedagogical standpoint. I think it was really interesting. So it was fun to do. I don't think there was anything that didn't work so well. I think it was actually a really good process from beginning to end.
Fantastic. All right. Just for people listening to the podcast, what was the issue you were being asked to consider?
We were asked to decide what was going to become mandatory for the desexing, and for government was going to do about getting dogs and cats desexed and identified. Actually, that was the mandate. So what should happen from a democratic perspective? What do people on the street see as fair and good and humane? And our eyes were really opened up to the problems with all the feral cats and even dogs, and all the problems that they face.
So looking back, do you think the process was worthwhile both for yourself and for the Dog and Cat Board who commissioned this process?
I'm not sure, because I haven't actually followed up what's happened after Ian Hunter put it to Parliament. I think it was a very worthwhile process. I think if you look at democracy, or what we term as the popular vote, if we look at what everybody agrees to is fair, then it's much easier to absorb something that is actually quite controversial, like killing little kitties and doggies, because that's unfortunately what has to happen, because we've been so irresponsible in how we've bred these animals and how they've taken over our very, very fragile ecosystem here.
And if a friend or a family member was invited to be part of a citizens' jury, what would you say to them about whether they should volunteer and what they should expect?
I would say expect to go on a very interesting journey. It's possibly not the one that you would have picked had you been given a choice. I possibly wouldn't have picked cats and dogs. I might have picked bicycles, and because
Yes.
that's more relevant to me. But as an exercise, I think it's outstanding. I think it's a really, really empowering mechanism that people can accept laws much easier.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else that you always tell people about the jury process that I haven't really drawn out?
I just think it was a real honour. It was quite literally winning a lotto, and it was very interesting to see how it was taken and put into a workable piece of legislation. I think that's really great, and I've had something to do with it. I enjoyed it.
Oh, that's
It's good.
great. And finally, here is Andy Holdup, who was a member of the Citizens Assembly South in the UK in 2015. Unlike the other three processes covered in today's episode, which were all commissioned by government agencies to get input into decisions they were making, the two Citizens Assemblies run in Sheffield, Citizens Assembly North, and Southampton, Citizens Assembly South, were commissioned by the Electoral Reform Society with a number of academics interested in democratic reform as a project to demonstrate the value of engaging everyday citizens on key governance issues, in this case, the devolution agenda. In episode 8, I spoke with Professor Graham Smith, one of the academics involved in the Democracy Matters project, about these assemblies, and in particular about the experimental aspect of the process, where the Citizens Assembly South included local politicians as well as citizens, whereas Citizens Assembly North only involved citizens. And in episode 10, I spoke to Titus Alexander, the lead facilitator for both these assemblies. The Democracy Matters process won the UK Political Studies Association Annual Award for Democratic Innovation in 2016. So Andy, can you tell me why you volunteered to be part of Citizens Assembly South?
I think the thing that drove me to it is that I'm almost in despair about the state of democracy around the place. So when I was approached with this idea, it was something that's fascinated and worried me for a long time, and this seemed like a good opportunity to explore it. I liked the idea of the experiment in the first place, and it was a good chance to talk to other people that I wouldn't normally come across.
Yes, you definitely meet a broad cross-section of people in these processes. From your perspective, what worked well and what didn't work so well in the Citizens Assembly South?
What worked really well was simply having 3 or 4 days to talk about a topic that most people in the room probably wouldn't spend much time discussing with other people, certainly not in that depth. And the opportunity to understand better what the issues were, to exchange views with lots of other people. What I think worked less well was that I'm not sure that we had enough time for a very complex issue really to be fully understood. And I have a background in local government. I used to work for a council for 25 years, and I was involved to some extent in a previous reorganisation of local government. So these were all issues that I was very familiar with. But I think we got to the end with quite a few people still being unclear about the organisation of local government, about who's responsible for what, and, if the truth be told, about what the question was that we were discussing. I'm not sure that it was absolutely clear that the issue was about a fairly esoteric question about the organisation of local government rather than about the delivery of the services, which is, I think, what most people were keen to talk about.
So there was sort of a bit of a mismatch between what people were interested to talk about and the topic, from your perspective.
I think so, yes. Yeah.
And I know that the Citizens Assembly South had, unlike Citizens Assembly North, had some of the elected reps involved. How did you find being on the Assembly with elected people?
I found it fine. I should say I've been involved in politics for a long time as well. So I'm fairly used to spending time talking about politics with politicians. So it didn't throw me at all. My impression was that as soon as there were people involved that were seen as being in some way expert in the subject, I use that word fairly carefully, but as soon as that was the case, people were very reluctant to put their views forward to start with. I know, and I listened to Graham Smith's piece about the assemblies, where he was talking about politicians dominating the conversation. I think probably the bit he missed was that this was very often because other people simply sat back because they knew there was a politician there, and they were very often reluctant to show what they knew or didn't know to start with. So it was very difficult, I think, for people who knew a lot about the subject actually to pull back from the conversation and let other people have their head. Having said that, that improved enormously after the first day. I think possibly because a lot of the other participants got more confident as the time wore on. My impression overall, I think, is that you've got to look at it from a number of different perspectives. Possibly from the perspective of the non-political participants. Having politicians there meant that there was bound to be a sort of imbalance in the input. There were bound to be a lot of loud voices from people who know the subject well, and a lot of people feeling slightly reluctant to chance their arm in the discussions. But at the same time, if you look at it from the politician's perspective, this was an extremely unusual opportunity for them to sit in a room and talk about anything with people who weren't there to talk to them as politicians. If you're involved heavily in politics or local government or government, whatever it is, most of the people you know that. So what you get from them is a discussion based on the fact that you are involved in politics. In this kind of arena, you actually got the opportunity to talk to people who weren't there because you were trying to get their vote. They weren't there because they were coming to you with a problem. And that was actually, I think, quite an unusual experience for a lot of the politicians who were there. So I think it was one of those occasions where it may not have been so great for the non-politicians to have the politicians there, but I think it was a very salutary lesson for a number of the politicians who were there.
And you've slightly gone into my next question, I think, which is that looking back on the process, do you think it was worthwhile for you and for the organisations that commissioned it, and why?
It was certainly worthwhile for me. I learnt a lot. I was, I think, shocked by the depth of disdain that the people in the room had for politics. And incidentally for civil servants and local government officers as well. There was a really, really deep mistrust of anyone involved in delivering government at whatever level, except, of course, every single politician that anyone personally knew. So they're all to be mistrusted, they're all to be despised. But the councillor that came round to help me with such and such a problem is great. They work really hard. My MP is fine. They work really hard. So finding out just how far that went, I found really eye-opening, horribly depressing, but eye-opening. So it was worthwhile from that point of view. I guess it has to be worthwhile just from the point of view of learning how the process works. So I don't know whether actually what we ended up with at the end of 2 weekends was a model that can be applied all over the place. But certainly there was a greater understanding about how that model worked. I suspect it would have been different if we'd had perhaps one further weekend to work on the subject after people had understood better what the issues were. And
it's
I
always
suspect,
difficult to pick the right amount of time, I think.
Oh, absolutely right. It's also very difficult to run this kind of thing on a bit of a shoestring. There were certainly problems, I think, with the selection process simply because the pool wasn't wide enough. So I doubt if it was as representative as you'd hoped, as you would have hoped. There were certainly very few people from ethnic minorities. There was virtually no one under the age of 40. And above all, this was the initial pool was effectively a self-selecting pool. So you had disproportionately people who believed that their opinions were worth something because otherwise they wouldn't have joined the YouGov panel, the opinion polling panel that we were drawn from. So I don't know that it was necessarily representative of how this would work if it were applied to a wider audience. The other thing that struck me very forcibly thinking about it later is that we came in with a question, which I think from the point of view of people who are involved in studying government or in delivering government was a reasonably clear one about how you should structure the running of government. I think probably the majority of people who were there came in with entirely different questions in their minds about what services should be delivered and what the nature of government should be from their perspective. And I'm not entirely sure that difference was ever broken down. And of course, this is one of the big problems with democracy as a whole, that if you take the European Union referendum as an example, we're in the most monumental mess at the moment because no one is entirely sure what the question was that we were answering at the time. And everybody came to it with a different question in their heads, which means that the outcome is entirely uncertain. And I think there was a little bit of that problem with the Citizens' Assembly as well. Not to the same extent, but nonetheless, I think it was clear to me when we were looking at the results of what people wanted to happen, that they were still looking much more at services rather than governance.
I was just going to say, do you think that was in part because their view was that if you changed governance, they would only be wanting to change it if it was going to have an impact on services, because that was, the bottom line for them about their council?
I think I'm sure there were a number of different reasons, but I think largely, if you go to discuss something with people, you'll get a much better response if you start off from the questions that they're interested in. I was interested in listening to one of your earlier podcasts with the difference, I forget which model it was, the Belgian one, where you get a group of people together and say, what do you want to discuss? And I'd be really interested to see if that same group that I was with would have come out with a different kind of discussion if we'd started off from the point of view of what they wanted to discuss rather than what the organisers wanted to discuss.
So would you recommend being part of a citizens' assembly or similar process to a friend or member of your family if they asked you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I have no hesitation in that at all. And I think most of my close friends and family probably got a bit bored of listening to me talking about it at the time, because it was something that I found really, really drew me in. So yes, absolutely, I would recommend it.
And if they sort of said to you, well, what can we expect when we go along? What would your sort of advice to them be?
I suppose I would say that you should expect to hear from people that you don't normally hear from, and you will expect to get a less polished view of the world that you're looking at than you're used to. Simply because a lot of the people that I'm involved with discuss these kinds of issues quite a lot. So I think as I was saying earlier on, one of the big things that I got from it was just to see a different view of politics, not people with different opinions, but people with a different understanding of what it was all about in the first place. And I think that's what I'd say that people I know should be looking for and should be expecting to find.
Is there anything particular that you think the people listening to the podcast, should know about the process that you participated in?
One of the things that really impressed me was just the sheer amount of effort and energy and intelligence that it takes to run a session like that. We were surrounded by volunteers who were showing a degree of understanding and tolerance and just enthusiasm that really, really impressed me. I was also massively impressed by the fact that we had several people there who were academics from different countries, all participating in a process in English and coping with it magnificently well. And I wished that people could have seen that before voting in the European referendum, just to see how well this kind of international cooperation works.
Thank you for joining me today. If you'd like to know more about the processes Ben, Lewis, Carolyn and Andy were involved in, please visit the website www.realdemocracynow.com.au for the show notes. In next week's episode, we move into the final phase of Season 1 to look at how we might evaluate deliberative mini-publics. I speak again to Professor Graham Smith about his approach to assessing democratic innovations using the concept of democratic goods, and also to Professor Brigitte Geisel about her analytic framework for doing the same. In the final episode of Season 1, I speak with some critics of deliberative mini-publics to get a different perspective on these democratic innovations. After that, I'll be taking a break while I put together Season 2. Season 2 aims to help us better understand representative democracy, its history, how it operates, what works and what doesn't, amongst other things. Season 2 will begin in March 2017. Thanks for listening to Real Democracy Now! You can find more about today's topic in the show notes at www.realdemocracynow.com.au. If you enjoyed this program, please subscribe to this podcast, write a review, share the podcast with your friends, and join the conversation on the webpage or on Facebook or Twitter. I'd love to know what you think is the essence of a real democracy.